So yesterday I reached out to Wren to see if they could get somebody who understood the science of the projects that they are offering. Particularly I was hoping that was an email from them. It is not. Particularly the California biochar and the uh, mineral weathering in Scotland projects, because I have some deep concerns about those. So far, I haven't heard back. Um, I feel like at this point, that probably means I'm not gonna. It is still kind of on the early side, but yeah, it's late enough in the day that I'm feeling like if they cared, if they wanted to get in touch with me, they would have by now. Um, yeah, so my concerns, just to briefly outline those again, the California Biochar Project, what they're doing is they're pulling dead and potentially flammable trees out of California old growth forests, and then they are processing them into charcoal. So they are at some stage, well, they're breaking them down in some way, smashing them up into smaller parts, and then, or before or after, don't know, probably before though, and then pyrolyzing them in some sort of kiln, some sort of reactor, where basically you take the carbon rich material. In this case, it's a logs, it's old dead logs, and you seal it off from the air, and then you heat it up so that the molecules break down basically into charcoal. That's pretty much how you do that. My concerns with this, I do like I do like this idea of taking the charcoal and then reincorporating it into soils and things. That I think that is a very good way to sequester carbon. My concerns with this is their source of carbon. Um, and I'm totally happy to be wrong about this, but it seems to me that instead of doing all of this with the dead trees that they find, maybe what they should do is any that are standing, fell them, more or less leave them in situ, but maybe like half bury them, partially bury them, so that what they will do is they will absorb moisture as it comes into the environment and help maintain soil moisture, help maintain soil structure, provide habitat for bacteria, yeasts, fungi. I guess yeasts are fungi. Um, all sorts of things, lichens, mosses, lizards, small mammals, all sorts of shit, insects. Um, and over time, it will break down into, um, in particular, uh, materials that cannot be further processed by living organisms. So it becomes some of that carbon will naturally be sequestered, and a lot of the rest of it will actually end up in biomass, um, one way or another. Some of it, yes, some of it will escape into the atmosphere as CO2. That is true, or methane, or a few of these other chemicals. That is true. But when you pyrolyze it, you're having to produce so much heat that you have some carbon footprint there anyway. So yeah, you're putting something into the atmosphere either way. But in the case of just leaving it or partially burying it, you are improving um, the ecosystem of that forest that it came from, and you are maintaining, if not increasing, the amount of carbon in that ecosystem instead of removing it. So yeah, and in my little where I plant corn and shit, I actually have logs that just sit on the soil, um, and I basically do this. So um, when I uh, sometimes I buy firewood, but actually I have enough neighbors that are always chopping off limbs of their trees and things that I'll just go around and ask them for those limbs and then break them up myself into in like smaller logs, and I might cook with them or um, do something like that with them. Sometimes I'll process them into charcoal and use that for various things like water filtration. But a few of them, what I've done is I've just half buried them. And the amount of things growing right under and around that log is absolutely amazing. And this is in soil that I've deliberately made extraordinarily rich anyway. The soil away from the log is poorer in biodiversity in life than the soil right around the log. So yeah, I think this is the way to do this, is to keep that material in the forest soil. And then the mineral weathering, the more I think about it, the worse I think it is. So my fundamental concern at this point is that healthy, rich soil, which is high in carbon dioxide, is already a carbon sink. And that richness of carbon dioxide is actually a carbon sink already. So putting the basalt into that soil, putting the ground basalt flour into that soil, one, when you work that soil, you're releasing some of that CO2 into the atmosphere because you're disturbing the soil. There's that. Two, the enhanced weathering that you're doing that to sequester carbon is sequestering carbon that is already sequestered. And if we properly manage our soils, it will remain sequestered as it is. And three, I know there was another one. There was definitely another one. Yeah, I got lost. Okay. Yeah. So there's problems with the mineral. All right. So we're trying to enhance the mineralization of the carbon, right? We're trying to get it into the CO2, into calcium carbonate, calcite, limestone, all sorts of different. But we're doing it at a soil level, so it's going to produce caliche, probably, depending on where you're at. So that in itself poses problems for the soil, right? So the native soil in the Sonoran Desert, where I am, is heavily caliche based, I guess. It's a way to say that. There's a layer of caliche pretty much fucking everywhere. And for the most part, this is actually kind of young. This is, in most areas, it's only about 10,000 years old, which is one of the reasons that I strongly suspect that the Sonoran Desert is actually a man-made, devastated ecology. Because prior to that, it was different. Why? What happened? What happened to 10,000 years ago that completely changed the way even the soil works? And the way that this happened is, for the most part, because you don't have any sort of limestone deposition. You don't have animals or trees or whatever falling over, being burnt or whatever, and getting their bones, getting seashells, getting ash from trees. what's happening is this is actually calcium in dust particles in the rain. And when it falls and hits and it's on the ground and it sort of deposits a little fine layer of calcium, that reacts with the CO2 in the atmosphere, turns into calcium carbonate, and the way that it forms on the surface, it becomes caliche. It's basically exactly the same as limestone, but it's at a surface level, and that over time, over 10,000 years, that can produce in some areas quite thick deposits of effectively cement. So basically nothing can grow. So is this really something that we want to be doing? Do we really want to be introducing this sort of material at a large scale in healthy soils when we're already faced with a situation where we don't have that many healthy soils left? Is this really what we want to be doing? And yeah, so and apart from that, it's sort of tied into that. Pulling that CO2 out of the healthy soils, how does that change the situation for the microbiota in the soil that is keeping it healthy? So you're now changing the where how it's interacting with the atmosphere. You're changing how much oxygen is now in the soil by percentage at least, how much nitrogen is in the soil. Does this impact nitrogen fixation in bacteria and archaea that do that? Does this, like, there's a whole range of potential implications here. Is this really what we want to be doing? And you might note when I showed the soil CO2 levels that it ranged from 400 ppm to 40,000, and the current atmospheric levels are right around 400 ppm. So that 400 ppm CO2 in the soil, those are dead soils. That's dead soil, where the only carbon that's there is from the atmosphere. Right? So you have nothing producing CO2. You have no respiration occurring. It's just the atmosphere sort of percolating into the soil right there. That's a dead soil. That's not what you want. That 40,000 is probably a pretty healthy, vibrant soil. That's what you want. So pulling that level down, that feels like it's a potentially very bad idea. Because it could be doing all sorts of different things that we're not anticipating. Also, that healthy soil clearly is successfully sequestering carbon. If it's 100 times the atmospheric level, it's already sequestering it successfully. And what we should be doing is trying to maintain and expand those sorts of soils instead of sequestering that carbon further and potentially fucking up that ecosystem in that soil that's already working nicely. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I kind of hope somebody from Wren gets in touch with me, but at this moment, it's not looking like that's going to happen. So, we'll see.